Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast for, what is it, August? It is August now. Wow, alright. August 2024. I'm your host, Adam Koralik, and I am joined by the indestructible, apparently, Joseph Tamburino. Welcome back, Joseph.
Hey Adam, glad to be here.
Yeah,
I'm apparently new Rob, but...
You're new Rob. Yeah, well, you're a firmware updated version of Rob, which I always appreciate. But yeah, so this is a Patreon-backed podcast in which not only do you get this podcast super early and just kind of will it into existence, but, you know, you get early access to my videos and you support the channel, all that sort of thing. All the links for that are in the description. But yeah, you can be on the podcast, such as Joseph. You can pick subjects, get shout-outs, get early access to videos, or just support everybody, which we appreciate you doing. So... today, it's just going to be Joseph and I, actually, because Abdullah was going to join us, but I guess he came down with a cold. He said his throat's, like, burning him, so he's like, I can't really record. So we wish him well, hope he does well, so Joseph's going to be here the whole time. Also, I just want to pat ourselves a little bit on the back, and just so everybody out there is aware, this is the 99th episode of this podcast. This is the last... Wow. Yeah, this is the last double digits episode. There is a little bit of a plan for the 100th, but we'll leave it at that for now. So, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started here on our first subject, which actually is your subject, as, of course, someone who gets you pay to be on here, you get to pick a subject. And you kind of didn't really have one, so we kind of went back and forth, and we said, how about this? Yeah, well, so do you want to introduce it?
Sure. So, guess what, everyone? It looks like Power Rangers is dead. Like the live-action TV show is dead. For realsies this time.
Now, I know that might be kind of a weird thing for us to lead with, but he and I are both kind of children of the 90s, so, you know, you got to understand if you're Gen Z or whatever, or you're probably most likely, let's keep it real, most of you are probably millennials about our age. I mean, I'm sure you remember Power Rangers blowing up in, like, 1993 and it defining a gigantic chunk of your childhood and all that. For us, it was, like, this huge thing. Mm-hmm. And even though it was a colossal juggernaut in pop culture, and then it continued after we all kind of outgrew it. And, you know, it became a mainstay in pop culture for other kids and everything. But it's... You know, it had a couple of buyouts. I know Saban, I think, originally did it for something like 19 years. And I think it was Disney bought it out after, like, their 19th season. And the 20th season? No?
I actually know.
You looked this up, right? Good boy.
Well, I was actually... So, funny story, like, I watched it originally, and then I grew out of it. Then my youngest sister was born, and then, like, when she was, like, around 6 or 7, she started watching it, so I started watching it with her. So for a while around there, I was watching the show again. And then I have a bunch of friends who were still into it and watching it. So I've been hearing about all this stuff as it's been happening. So what it actually was is that Saban started it by, you know, adapting a various series of Super Sentai in Japan.
Specifically Super Sentai Zyuranger.
Yes.
But that was not his first choice, incidentally. But
no, it was not. He had been trying to do it for, like, years before that.
Yeah.
But anyway, eventually, like, during, I think, Wild Force, I think that was, like, season, like, 7 or 8, Saban basically sold... Power Rangers got sold to Disney, along with a bunch of other stuff they had. And honestly, Disney bought Saban stuff for the rights to Digimon and some other stuff. They really didn't give a shit about Power Rangers.
To be fair, something worth noting in that acquisition, that's at the time, if you remember, Ninja Turtles had bottomed out, and Saban had bought Ninja Turtles. And then, when Disney bought them, they had both, and they did the only crossover the two have ever had, was an episode of Power Rangers in Space that features Power Rangers in Space. It was. But that's my point. He did that before they were sold off to Disney.
Right, okay.
And, but Yeah. So, but then he also did it with what was it? With the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, where they had a fifth turtle, the girl one, named Venus. Like the two of the worst versions of both franchises is how we got a crossover. And then when Disney got them both, they kind of sold Turtles off to Nickelodeon relatively quickly. But anyway, go on.
Okay. Yeah. So then Disney had it for like quite a while, like several. I mean, like for like several seasons, and I think like I don't know what season RPM was. I think that might have been 19. But at that point, Disney was like, okay, this isn't worth making anymore. We're getting rid of it. So Saban comes around and makes a new company and buys it back from them, and then starts doing more.
Have you seen Have you seen the Toys That Made Us about the Power Rangers?
I have not.
It's a Netflix show. He's interviewed in that because he's talking about Power Rangers, and he actually tells that story about when he rebought Power Rangers back from Disney. He said, "I wasn't the highest bidder. I was the only bidder." When I went to, he's like, so when he heard that it was for sale, he put in like basically a gag offer because he was like, it'd be cool to get it back, even though I, don't really want it. And they took his offer. And as it turns out, it's because literally no other entertainment company or anyone made any other offers.
That doesn't surprise me. Like a lot of people I know who were still watching it at the time said RPM was really, really good. It was also like obviously it's still a kids show, but it was also dark as hell. And it's like, and at that point they were basically like, okay, we'll try this. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll get older audiences more into it, besides like, diehard fans who like just never stopped watching the kids show, because why stop? Some people do that.
Yeah.
Case in point with something we'll talk about later. But like this, like they were like ratings and stuff were like going on a downhill climb for a while there. So then Saban had it for a while. They made a couple of seasons that, from what I understand, were really not good. Which if he did it as a gag offer and ended up getting it, it's like, well, okay, I guess I have to make shows. I guess I have to make a show now. That kind of makes sense.
To be fair to him, season 20 was that like where they basically reissued Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like the first season of it.
That doesn't count.
Like, that's what we're talking about, though. Like, he didn't have any plan, so he kind of went Transformers Generation 2 on it, where he just basically reissued the show with one season or two seasons, and then just put in like extra stupid graphical effects and things. Not like George Lucas style, where you can kind of see like why that might have made sense. In his case, it was like dumb transitions and things because he didn't know what else to do with it, I guess. So the only plus to that was that it got the show kind of some attention again, and it also led to a lot of new merchandise to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the original series. But I'm just throwing that in there as an asterisk. Anyway, you can continue.
Okay, so then after those Saban seasons, Hasbro then bought it, put out a couple of seasons. Like they went back to a series that Saban skipped over for Beast Morphers, and then they made. After that they made Dino Fury, and then the last one that they made was Cosmic Fury, which is, fun fact, first one since, In Space or Lost Galaxy to actually reuse. First one since In Space to reuse the previous team of characters for the new Ranger team that came on for Cosmic Fury, which was the one that came out on Netflix and had maybe 10 episodes or something. And after, with that and that reunion special Once and Always, that's basically where we are now, with Hasbro deciding at this point, being like, okay, screw this, sell all the props, we're done.
So there's a few things I want to throw in there. One, we're forgetting something kind of significant, which is the 2017 movie.
Right. That
which was still done under Saban. And that's an interesting case because, I feel like that was when Saban said, I might be able to make this work, with the nostalgia generation, the kids who, our age, loved it as children and are now adults and kind of want that vibe, but you also want to make something more mature that they're going to connect with. I feel like that's what they were going for with that movie, but they just didn't quite strike the right balance.
Yeah, I mean, for what it was an alright movie, but...
Yeah. Basically, it's the entire first episode of the original series turned into a movie, but also, like, drawn out unnecessarily. And it's also got a lot of extra stuff in it. You're like, was this really necessary? Was that really necessary? But it had a lot of parts to it that I thought were cool. Particularly one of the cool trivia bits about that is that, of course, Bryan Cranston plays Zordon in that movie. And that was at, like, the height of his Breaking Bad fame. And to have him in that movie was crazy, except that he basically said, when I was younger in Hollywood and I was trying to get work, nobody would give me a job except for a little studio called Saban Entertainment that let me come do some work on this thing called Power Rangers. He's in 4 episodes of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and not even on screen. He just got to do some voiceover roles. He was like, they were the only one that was willing to hire me. And he never forgot that. So when Power Rangers needed him, he was willing to, like, basically get paid almost nothing to do that movie because he thought he could help it. And to be fair, he's one of the better parts of it.
Yeah, he probably did, honestly. Like, I went and saw that movie in theaters. It's like, oh, so okay, cool. It's like it was just like, at the time, I was like, okay, well, I'm in a new city with a new job. The movie theater's right there, and you know what, this might be fun to watch. And I enjoyed myself with it, but clearly it didn't do well enough to actually warrant any of the sequels they wanted to make. But
no, it was kind of unfortunate. You could tell they didn't have much faith in it. You can typically tell from a couple of signs. One of them is whenever they're like, "Oh, we're going to film it in Canada." Okay, when a big American movie says they're going to film in Canada, that means the production team has no faith in it. Because they film them cheaper up there because the Canadian government will pitch in money. It's like a whole behind the scenes thing. And so that's usually when they're not sure of something. And then when you see the film itself and like 1/3 of it is about Krispy Kreme, you're like, oh, yeah. That's when you know, like, okay, they really didn't have faith in it and they were looking for someone to offset some of the damages. So that was like, who can we get to sponsor the movie? And that was like Krispy Kreme's condition, to the point where it's absurd. Like Rita Repulsa is almost debating like not destroying the world because Krispy Kreme is so good. And you're like, oh my God, what are you doing? Yeah. That was like, there are parts of that movie I really love. And there are parts of that movie where I think as a child I would have thought, yes, this is exactly where I want it to go. And then there's parts of me that are just like, why did you do that? But so my point is, I can see why it didn't work. And I feel like as we look back on the franchise now, that was probably its last real chance to kind of become a mainstream thing. After that, it was kind of relegated, as you said. After that, they mostly pitched it over to Hasbro, who was obviously interested in the toys to an extent. But in order to have toys, as we've learned since the 1980s, you kind of have to have the ongoing toy commercial,
right?
Which is the show. And their heart wasn't really in that. And I mean, I haven't watched any of the Hasbro era stuff, so I'll have to trust you on the quality of it. But like,
I mean, I haven't watched it either. I basically know most of that stuff from like Luncara's history of Power Rangers and stuff like that. But
yeah, I will say that. I give them some credit because in them they tried to bring around MMPR fans. I mean, that's where we get into that Once a Ranger thing or whatever the name of the special was. And I remember back in the day, Keith and I, when he was still on the podcast for like a year, he and I had talked about that when it came out. And the long and the short of it was written as a reunion episode of the original cast, but they could only really get 2 of the 6 members of the cast.
Yeah.
Because, it was written intentionally. Like Tui Trang, who played Trini, the Yellow Ranger, she died over 23 years ago. Well, almost 23 years ago. It's like she clearly couldn't be part of it. So they were like, okay, the plot will revolve around the fact that her character is dead. That I got. Yeah. They had the extreme misfortune that Jason David Frank, Green Ranger, Tommy Oliver, White Ranger, committed suicide like a month before production started.
Oh,
there's
nothing. No. That's not the case. He committed suicide a month before it came out.
Right, but he wasn't in it.
No, he refused. He refused. Apparently,
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure why, other than the fact that, whenever they did a big anniversary thing, they basically always get him back. And he was working on other stuff at the time. And apparently, one of the scripts that he got for the special is like, this is literally the thing I'm working on, but Power Rangers. No. I mean, I don't know how accurate that is, but I mean,
it's impossible to say
the reason why it would not come back. But every time that they try to do like an anniversary thing, almost every time anyway, they try to do an anniversary thing to boost the ratings up. It's him coming back. Like, he came back for an entire season in the Disney era for Dino Thunder.
Yep.
Then in Ninja Steel, he was in there as well. Yeah, I mean, they had a bunch of other Rangers there too, but he was like the main guest one showing up.
Yeah, because he's literally the most popular one that ever lived, in the whole franchise. And so it made sense. I'm not sure I buy that original excuse. I mean, he was only, at that point, a few weeks away from killing himself. I mean, apparently, it would not shock me if he was just kind of like not in the mindset to be thinking about that. Either way, my point was, he wasn't in it. Like, it's possible they could have, if he hadn't done what he did, he would have been alive for them to film a few, like, extra shots. Like, they could use his inserts at the very least, or, have him do the voiceover for his own character, whatever it is. But yeah, he couldn't be part of it for that reason. Then they went to Austin St. John, and they couldn't get, he was Jason, the Red Ranger.
Yeah.
They had the misfortune that he was under house arrest for insider trading allegations, and so he wasn't allowed to leave the United States. Well, they were filming this in New Zealand, so he couldn't go.
I think it was less insider trading and more COVID loan money fraud.
Either way, it was illegal.
He wasn't able to leave the country.
Yeah, illegal monetary issues that prevented him from leaving the country. And yes, thank you for correcting me, because it's been a few years since I really looked into this.
Right.
But there was that, and then according to Amy Jo Johnson, Pink Ranger, probably the most famous person to ever come out of Power Rangers, with the exception of, I guess, Bryan Cranston on the technicality. According to her, publicly in tweets and Facebook posts, they approached her. She said she was on board, but was waiting for an offer. The offer never came, and then they just filmed it without her. And she didn't really know where it got lost in translation there.
Oh, wow. I thought she was just not offered enough money because, she's a director now, and they were only going to have her as an actress, and even if the money was good for an actress, it wouldn't have been financially sensible for her to fly to New Zealand to make a lot less money than she would be directing. But
yes, I mean, that's possible that's a factor. I don't pretend to be. I'm just telling you based on what she did say publicly. I wouldn't doubt at all that they probably offered her peanuts. It was probably like, we'll pay for your flight and we'll pay you $2,000 to do your part, and it's not much money, and so it wasn't worth her time. But based on everything she was saying publicly, she was all for doing this just to do it. Because it would be more fun to be kind of have the whole gang back together. At least that was the logic at the time. And also, she's extremely good friends with David Yost, the Billy the Blue Ranger. And this was kind of his baby, and so she kind of wanted to support him on that basis. At least according to her publicly. So my point is, they wrote a reunion for 6 people and only had 2 of them. And it's the entire thing has to revolve around the 2 of them, where mysteriously, obviously for reasons that were pre-written, the Yellow Ranger couldn't be in it, and so the character isn't in it. But the other 3 are just mysteriously off screen all the time, or incapacitated in some fashion.
For what I remember from seeing the plot, I haven't watched it, but again, history of Power Rangers, I think they were all kidnapped by the Robo Rita villain.
Yes, that is correct. So they were shrunk down in their suits, so you never saw their faces, of course. And so they have to then recruit other members of the original Power Rangers franchise, the
replacements,
Adam and Rocky,
the actors
and so on
left
and so
the
forth.
show because they weren't being paid enough money.
Precisely, you had to get a lot of those guys, which I have nothing against those actors. They're awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. It's just that it wasn't really the vibe that the show was going for.
Yeah, honestly, when you think about it, obviously they were supposed to be a reunion special, so it was supposed to be nostalgia hitting for a lot of people, so that would have you would have wanted the original 6. But honestly, if they had managed to get Amy Jo Johnson there, and then for like the original, for like the red, yellow, and black Rangers, they just had Rocky, Adam, and Aisha, or I don't.
Well, no. Walter Jones did do it. He was one of the 2.
Oh yeah, no, I know, but I mean, like, yeah, the thing is that Walter Jones was there and he was one of the 2, but like Johnny Young Bosch, who played Adam, is in the movie. I mean, the special, he's as a cameo, which basically just exists to explain why he and Aisha, I think her actress is Karen Ashley, weren't there, and ties into one of the Disney seasons, because, fun fact, they did an Aliens Live on Earth cop season in like 2005 that's supposed to take place in about a year. So...
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, we're over here fighting this whole alien invasion that's invading this planet here. We are not going to be able to get to you guys in time, sorry.
Yeah, Power Rangers is an insane continuity, but maybe we'll dive a little bit into that, but not a whole lot. Anyway, from the production standpoint, it's just that, yeah, that's why I think that was, if you ask me, was Power Rangers' last real chance from a marketing perspective. I think that the movie failure was the last chance for a mainstream, like, this could have been an ongoing thing. But the Once a Ranger thing, because I watched it excited for it as an MMPR fan, and I walked away from it very, very not content. I was like, that was kind of lame, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, which, I mean, when you actually think about it, I mean, it's perfectly fitting for Power Rangers, but...
I guess, but yeah, sure, I suppose, but...
I mean, not in the way that we would want it.
It was not in it's not in the good kind of lame. Like, part of the cheese of MMPR was the terrible writing, but, this is just, I don't know, it's, you pitch it as the big reunion thing, and you only have 40% of the cast. And again, even when you'll give a pass to, the Yellow Ranger, sure, but it's, I don't know, whatever. So that's not even 40%, 16.6%. So,
well, I mean, it depends. Oh yeah, true. I mean, because all the like the 3 replacements for the Rangers who left originally, and then Kimberly's replacement after she left in MMPR season 3. Yeah, they count too. They're part of the show, and like, Catherine Sutherland. Yeah, but like when you think about it, like Rocky, Adam, and Aisha were on the show longer than Jason, Trini, and Zach were. When you really think about it.
Yes, yeah. There might be a case against Rocky on that one, but the Johnny Young Bosch...
That's true. Austin St. John did come back for season 4.
Yeah, so Johnny Young Bosch is in... All right, so we could... Here, guys, obviously we've been talking about Power Rangers for 23 minutes, and this isn't even a video game. Okay, so we... Obviously, Joseph and I could talk about this forever, so we're going to try and just condense it down to what was actually the original point of this. Wasn't just, hey, let's reminisce about everything Power Rangers. It was... So, like, basically what we're trying to say is, like, the franchise as we knew it, which we clearly are passionate about, which we grew up on as kids, is formally ending. Its stuff is being sent down to heritage auctions in Texas, and they're going to basically just selling everything off to the highest bidder. And there's very little remaining content of Power Rangers IP that's going to continue, at least for the foreseeable future. I know you said there's some comics or something that's still happening.
Yeah, like a new comic series was just announced at San Diego Comic-Con like less than 2 weeks ago. For what I could tell.
And the other big thing, which might be like, in a pop culture sense, maybe the finale for Power Rangers for quite some time, is that Power Rangers Rita's Rewind game, which actually looks really good. It actually looks like a game that was... It's what does it remind me of? Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, or Streets of Rage 4. It's got that vibe, because if you grew up on the 16-bit like Genesis, SNES era, this is the Power Rangers game you probably envisioned back then, but coming to reality. And so that to me is something I actually really hope gets a physical edition, because right as of now, it's platforms that's coming to PC, and as of now, that's kind of it. Although I imagine that it's gonna hit everything under the sun, but we'll just have to wait and see. But, All right, so as much as I don't want to, we should move on, because trust me, we could be doing this for a very long time. I'm just kind of looking at time and I'm like, oh no, we're gonna end up talking about this for 4 hours if we keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah. So all right, well, we'll end it there. So Joseph, thank you for that subject, I guess. Now we'll move on. We have a subject from Lodmot. And this actually is kind of normally what would have been your subject, but I thought this was good to talk about under Lodmot because he likes stuff like this too. As you know, Joseph, Microsoft finally shut down the Xbox 360 store. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. They haven't shut down servers. So, like, if you already quote unquote bought a game, you can still re-download it from your library or whatever. But the storefront, as it were, no longer exists. And I don't know how that connects over to the backwards compatibility side of things, as in, the Xbox One and Series X you can digitally purchase, again in quotations, some 360 games. I don't know if that's still up or not.
I would imagine that anything that's backwards compatible, that's still available, that works on the Xbox One and the Series X, probably is still there.
Okay, I would hope so, because that would make sense. But
which,
I don't know.
True. That's not necessarily something we can assume with Xbox at times.
Right. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is more so there's no drama to this, in my opinion. Like, I've been essentially saying this would happen for years. Like, much to my shock, like, I actually have videos on the channel predicting that, Microsoft would shut this down by, like, whatever it was, like 2015, 2016. Like, they actually held out way longer than I think I ever expected them to, realistically. But, and to their credit, they've only shut down part of it. But this is how this works. They just shut down one element at a time. I think the Halo servers specifically went down like a year or two ago. Stuff like that gradually gets chipped away at. That way we kind of, accept it. I think that's, rather than shutting it all down kind of cold turkey. That's kind of the reality of what happens with an ill-supported game console that was successful. Like, we've never really seen that before in human history, because most game consoles didn't have online dependency, and the ones that did were not particularly successful. Something like the Ouya, like when it went completely offline, like who even noticed? Or Mad Catz did the on live and nobody noticed, But there's very few that were big consoles that also had a massive online presence. And the best case you could probably make would be like the Wii, the Wii U, maybe the 3DS, etc. But even there, I would argue that those systems were much less internet dependent than something like the 360. Although the 360 nowhere near as internet dependent as, say, the Xbox One, but that's a different story. So it's just kind of interesting to see this happen in real time in our lives, because
just compare it to what happened when Sony tried this with the PS3 and Vita. Everyone freaked the hell out, and they were like, okay, no, we won't do it yet. We won't do it yet.
Yeah, what was his name? It was I can't remember his name. It's not Adam Boyes. He didn't do this. Who was the guy? Jim something? Jim Ryan. Yeah, Jim Ryan was the one who was famously kind of against retro content, who was running PlayStation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he was the one who made not only the announcement they were doing that, he's also the one that made the announcement they decided not to do that. And you could tell under great duress, because his statement was very passive-aggressive. But anyway...
yeah, I mean, I can't expect the PS3 store will last that much longer, especially since not a lot of people, complained about the Xbox 360. Like, I heard rarely anything about it. It's like, oh yeah, that's happening, and then I didn't even bother trying to dig my Xbox 360 out to see if there was anything I wanted to get that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also saw a video recently about the Sony PS3 store. Apparently, it's starting to be non-functional, as in not that Sony turned it off, but as pages and stuff are just literally not working anymore.
That doesn't shock me in the slightest. I mean, I'll give Sony credit. Theirs is the last of the 7th gen consoles that is still up.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right. They no longer have any reason to do that, because the one argument against it really was just, hey, Microsoft didn't, so we can't. But now that Microsoft went ahead and did that, as you point out, I mean, there were people who were upset about it, but nobody was like completely upset about it. I think
no one was freaking out like with Sony.
The reason they were freaking out with Sony was simply that they had did all three at the exact same time, or at least that was the plan. They hit you over the head way too hard. And Microsoft has proven that the model is to just slowly chip away at it. This is going to sound like a weird comparison, but it's basically the Saturday Night Live model. I don't know if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live's history, but when the show first started, it had like this really definitive cast of all the same people. You know, Chevy Chase, granted he rotated out after like a season and a half, but everybody else stayed. You know, it was Dan Aykroyd and, Belushi and all these other guys. Bill Murray would go in there, etc. Point is, they had this big cast, right? And after season 5, they decided get rid of absolutely everybody and do a completely fresh cast. And it nearly killed the show. And so when that didn't work, they basically replaced everybody except Eddie Murphy. And they kept doing it that way until they eventually they realized, like, in the mid-'80s that the strategy was really, you should keep some people and just slowly rotate out others. That way, you keep your Chris Farleys and your Will Ferrells as long as they're willing to stick around, but you integrate other people and get them used to the people that are popular. That way you have new rising stars, and they haven't had the same problems since. So it's kind of the same basic mentality with deactivating online content, which is, okay, we'll shut down like this one game's servers. People will hate us for a few days, but they'll move on. They'll get used to it. Then we'll shut down this one. Then we'll shut down that one. Oh, today we're shutting down new purchases. You can still access the store and get your old content, but the new purchases, that's not going to work anymore. You know what I'm saying? You just chip away at it until people are like, I don't really care anymore. That's to be expected. It's something that we all could have easily predicted. And you're right. PlayStation 3 is going to start getting less and less reliable because there's less and less people on that team that are there to fix it. I have no idea how many people Sony still employs to do PS3 server maintenance or updates or anything like that. But I imagine it's a small team at this point.
I think also with like the PS3 stuff, like with people complaining, I don't remember exactly. I think we were also unclear if it was just going to be like a complete shut off of everything. You wouldn't even be able to download stuff, or if it was just the stores, or just purchases or whatever. But I think there was confusion on that, because I remember a lot of people being like, "Oh shit! I have to go download everything I got."
Yeah, I think that they were basically saying they were shutting everything down for the PS3, PS Vita, and PSP all at the same time.
It made sense for them. It's not like the PSP was relevant anymore, and the Vita was basically dead on arrival if you weren't in Japan. But
precisely. So I that is the problem that it's okay. This is like a different problem. So like I hate to be the guy who's going to try and defend the major corporations here, but that is the problem that they run into is if they release a product like that, they have a certain expectation of continued support. So like the internet and connectivity does give you all these benefits and perks, but it's a double-edged sword because it eventually comes back to kind of hurt you because you're expected to maintain it forever, or at least maintain it for a long time. And when the system doesn't work, like the Vita failed, they were still expected to support it, which is insane. And they're still technically supporting it. Like Sony has to spend money on a daily basis to keep PSP servers functional, or PS Vita servers functional. That one didn't even do anything for them. And they have to end up hating doing that. So I can see why they don't want to. That's where I'll kind of, I don't know how Nintendo exactly gets away with this. I mean, the Wii is, as much as I hate it, was one of the most successful consoles ever. And they were like, whatever, we're shutting stuff off. We do not care what you think about this. 3DS and Wii U, relatively speaking, are nowhere near as old as the 360 or the PS3. And they're like, whatever, we're shutting it down. We don't care what you think about this.
I mean, with the Wii, I think the majority of it was that, like, most of the people who most of the people who had a Wii were not like traditional gamers, so it was like they didn't even realize the Virtual Console was a thing, probably.
Yeah, I'll give you that. I mean, like, you don't have to teach me that the Wii it was not a great console, but and the damage it did, but that's a different story, obviously. But my point is, Nintendo, for some reason, is able to get away with this and just be like, we don't really care what you think. I also think because they wisely have not made any of their systems super internet dependent. Because I think that's what bothers people the most. Although, when they do eventually have to shut down the Switch... I think that's going to go over.
That's going to be when Nintendo gets the free.
That's when they're going to have a rude awakening. Yeah, that's what. Actually, that'll be the real test because they've never gone through it. So when they do shut down the Switch, we will see when people get mad because Nintendo has the worst track record of online server support in the modern era. The only one you can make a case for that was technically worse was Sega, but that's only because they only had one system that really did it. And even then, it was still functional till like 2007. That's not that bad, all things considered. But yeah, anyway, so whatever. Anything? I mean, I guess we're just kind of pouring a beer out here for the Xbox 360 because I really don't have anything else to say about it because I'm not a digital gamer, so I really didn't have much interest in the online storefront. There was a brief phase, like very early on with the 360, where I kind of was romanticized a bit by the idea. I remember this because I was like, wow, this is before I had firmly married the concept of physical media. So this is a little story for you guys. Very early on, like we're talking like literally like 2005, 2006, like, 360 was brand new. And I got one at launch and everything. And I remember when they launched the concept of downloading your games as this thing called Xbox Live Arcade, which I think they dropped that name like many years ago, but I'm so old that I'm still used to kind of calling it that, which I think I accidentally named slip a few minutes ago anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I remember seeing a bunch of games on there and they were all like, this is like $3.99. This is $5.99. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, And back then they were using what I think they called it like Microsoft points or Xbox points. They had their own currency system.
Yeah, I remember.
And and so I had my mom at some point for some Christmas had given me like it might have even been Christmas 2005. Now that I think about it, that would make sense. And she had like given me like a bunch of these like Xbox points gift cards, And so I had a bunch of currency, and then I was like, okay, whatever, I'll download some games. And then I remember doing that and being like, this is so cool. And just trying it and then being like, of course, you're dealing with a 20 gigabyte hard drive at the time, and you're like, wow, so like it takes up a good chunk of the space on this thing. And if I want to make it more space, I have to delete it, which means I'm going to have to download it again later. And that means I have to remember to download it later. And that's dependent upon me just not forgetting I technically have this somewhere. Because at least with a physical collection, it's like, I don't remember all my Sega Saturn games. Let me walk in the other room and take a look. Oh, there they are. Okay. I do have that. Okay. But with like a digital game, like somewhere in their cloud service or whatever, I'm to be expected to remember the title of a specific game. I don't know. Something about that at that moment, I was kind of like, I kind of think I don't like this idea. And I think that was maybe where my distaste of digital games kind of originated, was oddly enough the Xbox 360 storefront. So in hindsight, I'm celebrating it shutting down. Goodbye. Rest in peace.
Yeah, like for me, like for like consoles and stuff, like I would occasionally buy stuff digitally on them, like especially back in the PS3 and 360 era. But I would usually only do that for the most part if the game was on sale. Like obviously now I primarily shifted to PC, so I'm kind of stuck doing digital games for new stuff just in general. But oddly enough, like for a while, like in 2012 to like 2010 to 2012, like when the PSP and Vita and 3DS were a thing, I was buying a lot of games digitally for those because it was just like, oh, cool, I could get them digitally, and then I will have them and with me whenever I have the system with me, assuming I had enough space. But eventually, like at some point, like I mean, part of it was probably like starting to watch your videos and then getting into the collecting mindset. But like even before that, eventually I just kind of shifted to buying everything physical again for consoles. For the most part.
I mean,
unless it was like on sale. But
go ahead. Well, contrary to I've seen this misunderstanding of my position in the YouTube comments many times over my, shall we say, storied eternal YouTube career of being on this platform. So a lot of people have called me hypocritical because I'm like, well, oh yeah, here guys, we're gonna review like this ODE for this game console, and you digitize your games. Like, but you don't do digital. I'm like, that's not the same thing. So, like, first of all, the games I'm putting on something like an ODE are games I've ripped myself, meaning I own them physically. So the difference is, when it comes to something, I understand the value of digital convenience. I do live in 2024, you know, at the time I'm recording this, right. The same as all of you. I understand the value of that. It inherently more convenient. The difference is, I still, at the end of the day, own that original title, and if I want to be sure if I own it, or if I want to resell it, or whatever it is, I have that option. But the idea of paying money for that convenience, which is actually just the foregoing of my own ownership rights, that's a really different argument. And that I'm not okay with. So, like,
right.
I'm okay with digital content that's freeware. Let's put it that way. Or is at least, you know,
yeah, it's not the digital thing that's your problem.
It's not the digital archiving in of itself. I believe in digital archiving as it's very good for preservation. What I don't believe is that digital content is in fact property. And neither do these companies, because they're the ones that constantly maintain you don't have the right of ownership. So if I was a savvy lawyer, I would make the case that if you're making the case that it's not property, then you can't say you own it to sell it either. And that's a different discussion, but regardless, that means I don't have a problem with having like a GameCube with an ODE in it or whatever, but I wouldn't, like, if you said, hey man, how about instead of going out, like, what's an expensive game? Cubivore or something for the GameCube. They're like, yeah, you can go out and buy the game. It's $400. That's super expensive. Or if you want, I'll just send you the file for $400. I'd be like, I'm good. Thanks. Like, there's no part of me that would even remotely consider that. So yeah, but for some reason we're expected to be cool with that in a digital storefront, like the Xbox 360 marketplace or whatever. Now, granted, Cubivore is an extreme example, but that's kind of my point, is that I really have never seen the benefit of that other than convenience. But to me, ownership rights are more valuable than convenience, especially in the era of Amazon and eBay. You know, so
yeah, like in my case with like Steam and the PC, I mean, if my PC wasn't so much more powerful than even like the PS5 and Series X I have, I wouldn't be using it as my primary gaming platform. Like, the fact that I put such a higher end card in here is why I can kind of mentally do the justifications like, okay, I'll buy it on Steam, and if it ever gets delisted or whatever and I want it back, well, time to go sail the high seas and get a crack for the game I already paid money for. There's not really much of anything that Valve or the publishers can really do about that, and like, even if they would go after, just like, I own the game, I bought the game from you.
Yeah,
and then PC has not changed.
Yeah, the argument, though, that they would make is, well, you've ceased to use our terms of service, which is exactly the whole problem with digital ownership. But that's a different discussion that we've
already had. Generally, unless if you're like being really egregious and like downloading like terabytes and like terabytes of games, game companies aren't going to go after you. They're going to go after the sites or whatever that's allowing you.
Oh, no. I'm not talking about pursuing of individuals. I'm just talking about the legal case for what is ownership, but we don't really need to go into that. We've talked enough about this. This is when we're getting off topic anyway. So we'll just move on to the next subject. So yes, pour one out for Xbox 360 store. Did you guys have any great experiences or weird experiences? I know there were some people in my Discord. There was a guy in my Discord, I'm going to give him a shout out here, VidGamiac, who I have never in my life seen a guy more into the Xbox brand than that dude. This dude has every physical edition of the Xbox One ever released, And when I say that, I mean everyone. Like every regional exclusive, every slight disc or artwork variant, it's impressive. So when the 360, yeah, no, it's nuts. And when the 360 store was shutting down, he was like, "All right, I'm going to spend the next few days going into massive credit card debt," because he wanted to make sure he downloaded every single 360 digitally locked title with every piece of DLC. And he didn't really seem to care how much it would cost him to do this. So I just give him mad props. Like, because that was the craziest story I've heard. He was sharing screenshots. He's like, all right, I managed to get this. Everything is secured. It's all there. And I'm like, good for you, man.
Jeez.
Yeah, he'll even get like variants from other countries because they have different achievement lists. Like, it's impressive. I love collectors because we all have our rules and why we do different stuff. But yeah, that's another discussion for another time. So we're gonna move on. But yeah, pour one out for the Xbox 360 store, and thank you very much, Lodmut. So our next subject comes to us from Sinjeet, who actually didn't have one, so we just kind of picked one on his behalf. He kind of likes when we do these like discussion subjects about timelines, like what if this had happened instead of this, whatever. And so I kind of thought of, wouldn't it be interesting to ask the question, and Joseph, I pose it to you. It's like 1998, and Apple launches the Pippin, right? The Apple Pippin, which came out in Japan under Bandai's brand, came out in North America under the Apple brand, and technically came out in Europe under the Apple brand. But also came out like at the exact same time Steve Jobs came back to Apple. And when he came back to Apple, he shut down everything that wasn't his, including the Pippin. He did it immediately. And it only kind of did okay in Japan because he couldn't quite make Bandai cooperate right away because Bandai is a separate company. But he basically found different ways to kind of shut them down. But anyway, everything, he had the system recalled in North America and recalled out of Europe, and it basically was never seen here again. And then most of the units that did exist were just kind of sent over to Japan to be slightly repurposed and sold by Bandai. My question I pose is, what if Steve Jobs had come in and said, I'm not going to shut that down. I want to see where that goes. What do you think would have happened?
That's a very good question. Because you have to remember a thing about Apple that might seem insane nowadays. Oh, I know. The reason why Steve Jobs was able to come back to Apple is because Apple was doing like financially horribly.
Yes,
and, like,
they were on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah, to the point where Steve Jobs actually had to go talk with Bill Gates and get a partnership with Microsoft, where Microsoft owned part of Apple for a bit to get funding. Yep. So,
and out of that was born the iPod. Yeah. Which is what saved Apple. Now, and I know that history just as well as you do. Now, Apple is, I think, the second most valuable company in the world, second only to Microsoft, which is insane.
Yeah.
And which also says something about the little, relationship they have, although obviously Steve Jobs is no longer with us and Bill Gates is. But
yeah. Oh, so Bill Gates isn't part of Microsoft anymore.
True, but I mean he's still alive is all the point I'm making.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, what happens in our timeline here where Steve Jobs cancels everything else, but he says, I'm going to give this Pippin thing a shot. What happens? Because there's the possibility that he goes into this and you end up with this massively successful console, or he actually kills Apple completely.
Yeah, it's one of those two, really.
Yeah, it's the only real outcomes that are possible. So, I don't know, let's kind of wax and wane, because we obviously don't know. So let's wax and wane a bit about each scenario. So let's take the more fun road here. They release the game console, and they say, we're sticking with this. We're going to put this in. So it comes out in 1998. It would have come out a year before the Dreamcast. So at that point, it would have been more capable than the it was the most powerful system in the 5th generation. So provided they could have got a bunch of good developers on board, they might have been able to get something going with that. I think that, I don't know what they made it compatible with. It's very similar. It's PowerPC infrastructure, comparable to some other Mac of that era. So I would imagine you're talking about like an Amiga CD32 situation where they probably could have ported over a whole lot of stuff very quickly. But I guess I don't totally know that.
Yeah.
Now before you guys start like laughing and be like, whatever, in the real timeline that we live in, they actually had Bungie as a developer. Like they made Marathon for that thing before they made Halo, which is like kind of the precursor to Halo. So it's not like they were without talent.
I think Marathon was basically like the game that you would have a Mac computer for.
Precisely. So imagine if they had kind of pushed it more in that direction. Now, if they had other developers on board, etc., I'm wondering if you could have, out of that system, could have had the definitive edition 5th generation game console, where like you kind of treat it almost the way, how do I put it? Like kind of the way that the Wii U was kind of intended to be the system that had all of the best versions of 7th gen games, even though it was an 8th gen console. This would just be the absolute end of the line system for that generation, a year before the Dreamcast. Well, technically the same year when we think about the Japanese launch. You have this system that I think would have been fascinating to see what they could have done with. And it would be interesting to see, like, I think its only real advantage, though, would have been the easy ability to port games over to it. But as I sit here and think about it, I think Steve Jobs probably made the right call, because the system that it's most similar to is, as far as story, is the Amiga CD32. Because it's like, similar to their own hardware. They were porting everything over and the system didn't work out at all. So think about it as being like a more powerful version of the CD32. But at the same time, it would have had all the problems of the Dreamcast and none of the benefits. So like it would have come out a year earlier than the Dreamcast, but would have not had the additional powerhouse capabilities to look like a next-gen system. It would not have had Sega as a developer. It would have had all Apple in-house stuff, or whoever they could have rounded up. Apple, as you correctly pointed out, was in not a financially tenable position. So they probably, if it wasn't an immediate success, probably couldn't have sustained it for very long. And here's the other one. What big technology helped hurt the Dreamcast? Burn discs, right? Just a factor. Mm-hmm. Well, the Pippin didn't have any disc protection of any kind. Anybody could rip a disc and then just burn it. It wasn't even like the Dreamcast.
There's no way it's a financial success then.
Yeah, that's my point. I think it maybe could have made more noise in 1998. And then I think that the Dreamcast coming up would have killed it in the same way the PlayStation 2 really killed the momentum of the Dreamcast. But yeah, I can't see any realistic scenario where the Pippin ends up being a success in the year it came out.
No, it would have had to come out like 3 years earlier. Possibly.
Either 3 years earlier or like 3 years later. But with newer tech, obviously. I do think Apple releasing a console around the time the iPod came out, with like iPod connectivity and all this other stuff, then you might have had something Steve Jobs kind of considered as a console, like whatever his vision of what that would have been. I think that could have worked. But the Pippin that we got in our timeline, I agree with you. I don't think, unless that system had launched like 3 years earlier with the exact same specs and a whole lot better of a game library and development, I don't think that would have worked. But let's argue for a second that it doesn't work, which is what I think we're agreeing on. Does Apple cease to exist entirely? Like, do they even have funding for the iPod? What does Microsoft do? Or does Microsoft decide we're going to back this Pippin thing, and the Pippin is the precursor to the Xbox?
That's also a good question. Like,
yeah, see, instead of
Microsoft, because if Microsoft
Sega,
owns a significant enough portion of Apple,
yeah,
I mean, they
you
probably
see where this is going.
and then
See,
if the Pippin is successful, well, no, I mean, they probably still would have wanted the Xbox anyway, but
yeah, because we live in the timeline where Sega was supported by Microsoft, and we still got the Dreamcast and then the Xbox. So if the Pippin is successful and backed by Microsoft, then Microsoft probably has very little, if anything, to do with the Dreamcast. And if that's the case, then Sega's in an even worse position than they were. So I think that you would have ended up with two, in that case, very mediocre consoles. You would have traded a lot of the benefits the Dreamcast had over to the Pippin, and both of them would have suffered for it. So I think if anybody's out there is curious, I think we live in the better timeline than what that could have been. But it's still kind of interesting to think about, because if he had made the choice to support it, it is also possible that not only does Apple fail and go under completely, but Microsoft says we're not touching video games with a 20-foot pole, and Sega does it even worse, and Sony completely ends up taking over the video game industry like by them. So I know it's possible that if Steve. So I kind of think we might have made the right decision all the way back then. As much as it sucks for us, as we say in this very niche community, Pippin heads, which I totally made that name up. But it does suck that there's so little stuff for it. But at the same time, it's probably for the best.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Steve Jobs definitely made the right call there, considering the A, condition that Apple was in, and B, part of the deal with the Pippin was that it's basically also be like basically a Mac computer as well. So all the Mac clones was not a good thing for Apple, since their whole thing was like, they're not like Microsoft, whose whole thing was, we make an OS, put it on everything, on every computer that comes out that wants it. Their whole thing was like, their OS is meant to drive hardware sales. So the fact that they ever did Mac clones was like a giant mistake.
Yeah.
That said, it's entirely possible that even if they kept trying the Pippin for a while, it might not have killed Apple. It really just depends on how much money Apple actually pours into it, and how much, like, if they actually commit like a significant amount of money into it, then yeah, they're probably dead. But if they just like do some of it, it's like, okay, well, this is already running, we've already committed the money, even if we pull it back, we'll not really save a ton, so whatever. Let's see where this goes, and then they still come out with the iPod, and then they're fine. Maybe they're not dead, but I can't see the Pippin like being a success. So, although if it was, that would be interesting, because then we could have had, then whenever like a Pippin 2 would come out, and like in the 6th gen, we could have actually had like 5 consoles in that generation. Besides, but not counting the new one, because that had like 6 games. But
8, sir. 8.
It had 8 games. Okay,
8 perfect games. Every single one a 10 out of 10. All right, so I'm just looking because I wanted to double check the iPod's history. So it launched in 2001. It actually launched the same year as the Xbox and the GameCube, which is kind of interesting in hindsight. But yes, that is so weird to think about, actually, because it means that the Pippin being a failure, that's the timeline we live in, if it had gone up head-to-head with everybody in a more serious way and failed, yeah, obviously we wouldn't get the iPods, but if it had been any sort of success story, or if Microsoft had backed it, we probably wouldn't have got the Xbox. Not in any like serious capacity where it was like some deal with Apple and Microsoft like making a system together. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. Obviously, there's too many X factors and variables to that. But it's interesting to think about what it would have been like to be a winner. But I think its only chance, really, and I think you said it best, it would have had to be the same system come out 3 years earlier and have way more developers on board. If the Pippin as we know it came out in 95, it probably would have done really well.
Yeah, like I don't know if it would have actually beaten the PlayStation, but it could have easily like gotten second place if it had the support.
It probably could have taken the Saturn and maybe even the N64 in North America. Let's not forget, one of the biggest reasons for the PS1's success was because both Sony and Nintendo screwed up so vehemently.
Oh, God, yeah.
And so not to take away PlayStation's actual correct decisions, and of which they had many, but they did benefit massively from the mistakes of their competition.
Yeah,
However, Apple didn't make those same mistakes. They too would have had an easy to develop for disc-based system.
How much did how much was the Pippin selling for, though?
That I don't know offhand. Yeah, I don't know.
That's what the internet's for.
It is, but also at the same time, I don't know if the tech they put in it would have been possible in '95. Obviously, we're just waxing inane here.
Yeah,
but
okay. Pippin launched at $5.99. So
$5.99.
According to the Wikipedia article, yeah.
Yeah, no, it never had a chance.
No.
$600 in 1998? No, no wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I mean, the more you look into it, even when I personally want to come up with a scenario where it works, I can't find one. So no wonder Steve Jobs canceled it. It literally would have had to have been a scenario where it comes out 3 years earlier, Microsoft completely funds it, and they run it at a loss the way they do the Xbox. That's actually literally what it would have taken. It would have taken all that, as well as all the any sort of Mac-based content just being very easily ported over to the system and just dump games out there. You would have had to have an Xbox-level financial effort to get the Pippin's foot in the door, just the way Microsoft did.
Yeah, and Apple did not have the money to do that in '98.
Nope, they did. No, they certainly did not. So there you go. It would never have worked, everybody. Sorry to break all your hearts. Sorry, Sinjit, but thank you for the subject. So anything else to say on this?
Nope.
All right, then we'll move on. Although we could have bet that at one point, actually, that's the funniest thing. Even if the Pippin, as it is, had come out and it stuck around, like it didn't do like amazing, but they decided to support it and whatever for a few years, and the timeline is uninterrupted besides that, and the iPod still comes out, you couldn't connect it to the Pippin. No USB ports.
Oh.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder if they would have never found a way to make it connectable, or if there was. I mean, there's expansion ports on it. Maybe they could have made some sort of. It's Apple. They probably would have made some sort of proprietary cable or something. Anyway, I don't know. It would have been interesting. It would be interesting to see some creative modder out there find a way to get an iPod to interface with an Apple Pippin. Somebody get on that. All three of us that have Pippins, I think it's our responsibility. Okay, for realsies, we're going to move on. Thank you, Sinjit. Next up, we have a round of shout-outs. The following people are Patreon backers, and they are at the level of my Patreon in which they get a shout-out. So I want to give a huge shout-out here to Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Thank you so much for your support. I genuinely appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you, no matter what Patreon level you're at, or even if you're just listening to this on YouTube, on your car, on your way to work, whatever it is, I appreciate you so much. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the next subject, which would have been Abdullah's, but as I said at the top of this, he is not available. He's got health issues. He's okay. He's just got like the flu or something. So he said his throat's bothering him. So we will just, Joseph's going to do double duty here and stick around, and I appreciate him for that. So Abdullah loves to talk about the GameCube. And actually, I'm going to pose this to you. Since he's not here, maybe we can save this exact question for later. You know what? Yeah, I'm going crazy, Joseph. I'm going to change the subject. It's not on what's on the list.
Okay.
So I'm sorry to throw this at you out of nowhere, but you can look it up. You can literally Google this while we're sitting here. Are you aware? Did you hear? The website Console Variations, which is a very good website that basically tracks all sorts of different iterations of game consoles, like whenever there's a special edition of some system, comes out in one country, has a different type of box, different kind of paint scheme, whatever it is. Somebody found the original E3 2000 or 2001 GameCube. that I guess Reggie Fils-Aimé at one point had shown off somewhere, and so they've got it now. So they're taking a bunch of photos of it. So basically, the first known GameCube prototype ever has been discovered.
I was unaware of this site.
Oh, you've never seen the console variations before?
Nope.
Are you looking at it now?
Yep.
Oh yeah, it's a pretty cool website.
So, which GameCube is this? Is this the...
Right, so the problem is I don't think at the time of we're recording this, they haven't posted all the photos. They only posted one. So if you look up, literally Google something like console variations, prototype, GameCube, and it should, I think Time Extension just did an article about this actually. So you might be able to see it over there. Because there's only, at the moment we were recording this, there's only one photo out there, everybody. But I guarantee that'll change because they're going to post a bunch of them. But it from the one photo they put out, it's like it has a different lid. The power buttons, the buttons all look different on the console. It was still a cubey looking thing. You see
yeah,
it?
like I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm looking at the Space World GameCube one.
I think that's. I don't think so. Hang on. Console. You guys like my mechanical keyboard?
I do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Look up where we go. News. Okay. Yeah, I found it. So go to just literally Google console variations GameCube prototype and then go to like news. And the first one up is new photos of the rare Nintendo Dolphin GameCube prototype surfaced.
Aha. Okay.
See, it's just one image.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's much different. Okay.
Yeah, see? It's like an extreme close-up, which is unfortunate, but you can see it, the lid looks very different. Everything about it looks different.
Yep.
But this is the Dolphin, which was the prototype name for the GameCube back in the day. And yeah, I mean, I know there's not a whole lot to talk about with this. But as someone who's like carrying the Pluto around and stuff, I have an affinity for obscure prototypes and things like that.
God, that's
so
neat that someone actually found that.
Yeah, I agree. And so I don't know exactly when they're going to do this, but we're going to get more of a photo dump on this thing at some point. The shot, to their credit, the shot that they put out is very appetizing because you look at it and you go, well, I want to see more of it, but you can't.
Yeah.
The way they shot it as well, that was smart.
Yeah, wow.
So, yeah, I don't know who actually has it or anything like that. I haven't seen, there hasn't been a whole lot about this, just that console variations got access to it. Because it even says right here, it's not clear how console variations came across the Dolphin prototype, and they're going to keep that quiet for now. As they're also speculating basically that it's like Nintendo is probably going to be pissed about this kind of thing. I will tell you, yeah, Nintendo is not happy with prototype leaks and stuff like that. Do you remember, I think it was like a couple months ago, somebody found a Super Famicom prototype, which is just it basically almost looks like this final version of a Super Famicom, but it says prototype on it. Controller ports are slightly different. And they went to eBay with it, and Nintendo sent them a cease and desist over that. Like, Nintendo is very not okay with this kind of thing, even over stuff that's like 40 years old. Whereas I can tell you firsthand, as someone who carries the Pluto around, Sega is not like this at all. In fact, their position on it, they welcomed us and invited us out to their office in London to like show the prototype off to their employees because they thought it was cool, which is the exact opposite mentality. So I guarantee that's why.
It's almost like Sega doesn't need to worry about game consoles anymore or something.
Well, true, yes. It's just their mentality is different. They're like proud of their history. Nintendo doesn't and has never understood the concept of the public celebrating their history. They just always perpetually think of it as piracy and theft. That's all they ever tend to think of it as. Whereas Sega has a sense of humor, for lack of a better way of putting it. But I guess my point is, it's just cool to see this, and I'm not shocked at all that we don't have a full story of it. I mean, even the Nintendo PlayStation prototype, you got to remember, was technically a Sony creation, and that's why we know so much about it, because Sony was willing to talk about it and allow it to exist in the public sphere. There's a reason that no one is touring around with Nintendo prototype hardware. Like, there's no famous
Right.
Nintendo prototype hardware anybody's going around with. The best you can hope for is, like, some people have some development kits or whatever, because Nintendo, like, does go after people for this kind of thing, which is really sad, but it is what it is. Yeah, any thoughts on this? Anything to say?
I mean, it's neat.
Yeah,
not really that much to say about it. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I agree.
Like, even if it functions, is it? I don't think it would even function, or at least not function like the way a GameCube would now.
Bro, you have as much information as I do. This is something that maybe we can revisit later if there's more of an info dump. This was just kind of an appetizer because this is like, I figured we'll save Abdullah's subject for when he's actually back, but we also want to talk a little bit for him, you know.
Yeah, if that was like a topic he actually picked, then yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, we'll just wait on that for a bit. But yeah, so this one I just thought was a nice little appetizer, and it just kind of came to my mind while we were about to start talking about a totally different subject that is also.
That said, if he decides he doesn't want to talk about it next time, I am very okay with talking about that next time.
You got a plan, man. We'll do that. All right, so we'll just save that one for now. So you guys will have to wait until the 100th episode to find out what the mystery subject was. That's our big anniversary surprise, everybody. Okay, or not even anniversary, mile marker, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so then I guess we'll just move on from that. So Abdullah, thank you, even though you weren't here for this, and hopefully you got a little laugh out of that, and hopefully you also get well soon. So we'll move on to our last subject, which is going to be back to more pop culture-y stuff, kind of just like we started off with Power Rangers. We're switching back around to some MCU. And this shout out here to Spencer Perrier, who is a Patreon backer, who is at the level. He actually, fun fact about him, he actually is at the level in which he could be on this show every month, and he has never once opted to do it. Which I very much appreciate that he's that he's that supportive and that cool of a guy. That's how you know he's a good guy. So thank you, Spencer. What he wanted us to talk about is the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is something I used to love quite a lot. And specifically what he wanted us to talk about is the idea that they're bringing back certain characters, as well as they're bringing back Robert Downey Jr., What do we think of that? And probably better from the perspective of people who kind of stepped away from the MCU. Like, is this something that you're interested in? Would this get you back in the movie theater? You know, what do you think about this, Joseph?
Well, I can safely say that it won't get me back in the movie theater because I did not go to see Deadpool and Wolverine. So...
Yeah, I mean... The truth is, I actually do want to see Deadpool and Wolverine. I will admit, Deadpool and Wolverine is the first MCU movie since Doctor Strange and the what was it, a Mystery of Madness or whatever that
Multiverse of Madness. I didn't even see that one.
Yeah. I did. That was the one that killed it for me. As far as the theatrical experience, all the Disney Plus shows made me just tune out, and I caught up to the point of She-Hulk. And I was going to watch that, and it was, like, universally panned by people I respect and, like, trust the opinions of on this type of thing. When every person that I tend to agree with on that sort of thing was saying, just don't watch this. And then that started to become the general trend. And even the ones I was watching, I was like, this is just kind of Campbell's soup of entertainment. It's just, like, it's content. It exists, but I'm not enjoying myself. That's kind of when I tuned out. And so Deadpool and Wolverine is the first one since then where I kind of raised an eyebrow and said, like, I kind of want to see that. But then I'm like, I just haven't done it. But then in my defense, I was in Japan when it came out and I haven't really had time because since I came back, you guys, you have no idea. I came back from Japan like 2 weeks ago. This morning was the first time, and I was just mostly waiting for Joseph to get off work so we could do the podcast, is the only time I haven't been up to sundown making videos. I just want you to know that. Every single day, I've had to, obviously some of this is my travel channel. I know we're getting off topic here, but a lot of stuff from my travel channel, I have to edit that stuff. That stuff takes forever. Main channel content, I have to space out for a few weeks because I also have to get back on the road. I'm going to Long Island Retro and Kansas City Retro and all this stuff coming up. I'll also be at Portland Retro Gaming Expo later in September, by the way. So because I'm on the road, I have to make videos in advance, and so I've had no choice but to just sit around and edit and film and edit and film and edit and film sun up to sundown. And then I'm working on some bigger projects, which required me to write out entire outlines, like projects that will take me years, but my production of them technically begins next week, and so I had to have certain scenes completed. It doesn't even really matter. Point is, I have had no time to go and enjoy a movie. I haven't had any time to do that. So, yeah, so that's why I haven't seen that movie. But at the same time, I do go like, would I care? Because a few people I've talked to are like, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's very much making fun of itself and all that. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm willing to see it. I'm not sure I really care enough to go to theaters to see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, although them saying that like does make it like, okay, yeah. Okay, it's here, but honestly, it sounds like it really doesn't matter as far as like MCU continuity goes. It's just like, yeah, we got it. We have Ryan Reynolds, and we were able to get Hugh Jackman back. Just do whatever. Have fun. don't think about how this actually fits in too hard.
See, that's the cool thing about Deadpool. So, I mean, I remember when they were talking about doing this years ago when the Fox merger was happening, and they were basically like, we can't really mix the X-Men timeline, the Fox one, into the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it's completely different and obviously would overlap and cause a lot of problems. But the only part of it Disney wanted to take was Deadpool. Because Deadpool uniquely as a character is part of who he is as a character, jumps timelines and talks to the audience and all that sort of stuff. So you can break the fourth wall with him. So they had also set up all this parallel dimensions universe stuff in the MCU. So they had an advantage where they could theoretically pluck him out, which I think is kind of cool to make that work. And then we saw them actually kind of, if you ask me, they went too far with it, because when you have multiverses where death isn't a thing, which is about what we're about to get into, your universe loses any sense of value. So, like, as much as I loved the MCU all the way up to Endgame, I do feel that's kind of where it should have ended, because the thing that Endgame did really wrong, in my opinion, is it basically said the rules of death do not apply. Because, there's infinite parallel universes, and we can always come up with some sort of, Deus Ex Machina solution to allow us to go pluck Tony Stark out of another timeline so he exists here. And lo and behold, Robert Downey Jr. is coming back. Granted, I know, as Dr. Doom, which is probably going to be the butt of jokes, because I'm sure what they're going to basically say is, in a different timeline, Tony Stark didn't become the Iron Man. He became Dr. Doom. He became an asshole.
There's actually a comic that's literally that.
Boom! So there you go. This shit writes itself. Yeah. So it's just
I will. Hopefully they'll just be like, yeah, we managed to get Robert Downey Jr. willing to come back to Marvel, but he specifically said he would only do it if he's not playing Tony Stark. So we made him Dr. Doom because we needed to replace our villain.
Yeah, so you need a new villain, that makes sense, because that was one of the big things Phase 4 kind of lacked, was any sort of narrative thrust behind anything.
Well, I mean, the actor who played Kang kind of...
I know that... Yes, I'm aware of that. But they also didn't do the best job of setting him up anyway. So the problem with Phase 4 is it was way too spaced out over too many different ecosystems and too many shows, too many movies, and you were expected to know all of it kind of backwards and forwards, while also having it droll on and on and on with too many things that were just not important.
I don't know why I fell off of it. It's just like, okay, I watched WandaVision, I watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then I just never watched Loki, and then once I didn't watch that was it. I didn't watch anything else except for the Spider-Man movie.
I got a little bit further than you. I did watch season 1 of Loki. I even watched Hawkeye. And that's about as far as I got, because the next thing up was, as far as the shows go, was She-Hulk. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like, I had nothing against the character. It was the execution of the way they did it. Like her twerking and all sorts of stuff. I was just like, okay, I don't need any of that in my life. And Doctor Strange 2, for lack of a better word, was just... I just hated it. I was like, I can't believe I saw this in theaters. And, I could tell the direction it was going was just not engaging. to me. It was just very like they got bored making their own stuff, and they didn't seem to have any sort of direction to take it. So they were just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, which was kind of always the opposite, because the MCU always felt like it knew where it was going, even if you didn't. Now it felt like they didn't know where they were taking it, and you were scared because you were on this plane that was crashing.
Because you were seeing where it's going. It's like, come on, don't do this. There's a cliff there. Don't jump off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of how it felt. So I always felt that there was really no saving it, and I still kind of feel that way. But like I said, I haven't seen Wolverine and Deadpool, and I haven't gotten the impression from anyone that it's like some universe course-correcting movie, which is what I thought it could have been. If you make a bunch of jokes in there and you pluck them all into some new universe where they somehow get stuck in that universe, like I am of the mentality that if you're you can have an entertainment universe with anything in it. You just have to stick to your own rules, which is why I've always said, like, time travel only works in time travel specific stories, like Back to the Future. It doesn't work in, like, Star Trek, because if, like, what was it, Star Trek 4, the one with the whales, where Shatner realized, oh, there's an alien invading Earth. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to achieve time travel just to get away from this thing. I'm like, you can just do that? You can just get near a star and just do time
they had already done time travel in the series itself. So.
I know. And I hate all those episodes for that reason. Because I genuinely feel like, unless your story is specifically about time travel, you've introduced an element that is, why don't we just always use that? And I hate that in stories. To not necessarily use time travel as an example, like, what was it in the X-Men movies, the Marvel ones before Fox ended? What was it, the Dark Phoenix, where what's her face, just Jean Grey now can just be the Phoenix at will, and just like she instantly kills Apocalypse and everything, and you're like, oh, okay, so you can just do that now? Why don't you just always do that? Like, whenever there's a bad guy, oh, it's Magneto, yeah, whatever, turn him into dust, whatever. Like, whenever you have
Apocalypse didn't die in Apocalypse?
Yeah, he did.
Oh. Yeah, okay, like, you said Dark Phoenix. That was the one after that. But okay.
Dark Phoenix was the name of the movie. The Phoenix character, sorry.
Okay.
Right, the Phoenix, Jean Grey, as the Phoenix, she comes out at the end of Apocalypse. Sorry, spoilers, I guess. And she just, like, kills Apocalypse.
Oh, that shows how good that movie was. I completely forgot about that.
Right, exactly. That's my point, though. Like, once you introduce that your characters can do stuff that breaks the universe, then the universe isn't engaging anymore. So, like, time travel to me is one of those universe breaker elements, and only works in a Back to the Future or something like that, where that is the outrageous element of the story, is the time travel. Everything else about Back to the Future is pretty benign, normal stuff.
Right.
And the only, shall we say, magical element is that. And so it's you can't just introduce those type of elements as just side fare, and because I think that they're universe destroying elements. So within the MCU, you can have all these different things. You can have, Tony Stark is a genius who can make his Iron Man, and that's fine, that's who he is. You can have your super soldiers, that's your, Captain America. You have your super soldier gone wrong, that's how you get your Hulk, whatever it is. You can have your Norse gods and get your Thor. That's all fine. But they all have to adhere to certain rules. It's kind of like the Matrix. Like, you can exist inside the Matrix and, do whatever you want as Neo, but you still have to adhere to the rules of that system, which means if you die out here, you die in there type of deal. There has to be ground rules. When you establish in the MCU from a narrative perspective that, if a character dies, it's okay. We'll just find an excuse to go to another dimension and have a different version of that character just show up. It effectively means that death is meaningless. This is the Rick and Morty problem. I don't know if you watch Rick and Morty, but they ran into this same problem too, because the nature of that show is that Rick can just jump from portal dimension to dimension through his little portal gun.
I haven't really watched a lot of it, but I have seen some and do know that.
So part of the reason that show went on the decline was after season 2, everybody realized that the show had no stakes, because anything that he does can just be instantly undone with his portal gun. And the show itself even starts making jokes about that, because they're like, we went too far with it and Rick just became a god, and that made it uninteresting. So they had to try and tone him back down, which is a very difficult thing to do once you kind of unlock that. At least they had the benefit of it being a comedy. But in this case, you know, I have always maintained that for a good story structure to work, your rules have to be absolute. And one of the absolute rules of this universe and any other is that death is absolute. If you want to have a story about how somebody has cured death or reversed death, that can be a specific strange element in the way that time travel is a specific strange element of Back to the Future. Say a Frankenstein, okay? Right. That's a way of telling a story about making death not a permanent. But then what are the consequences of doing that? And you see what actually happens. You know, Frankenstein's monster destroys the town, and then you see the true barbarians of humanity, whatever. But
as opposed to like something like Dragon Ball Z, where they just have a magic summoning thing they can do. Like, hey, bring back everyone who died in this story arc. Okay.
Yeah, but like, I don't watch anime, but I'll trust you on that one. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but, Dragon Ball got very, very bad about like the stakes. Like they tried to tone it down. Like they had it like once that was introduced and once they established they could bring people back. They eventually did try to like tone it down, like at the point when Z started, where they're just like, yeah, no, the dragon will only do that once, will only grant the same wish once. But then they had to go, okay, well now we have to go into space to get new ones because ours are gone because this guy who was linked to them is dead, and also a couple of people died who were already brought back. So then they went to space, and then eventually just completely forgot about that rule. So yeah.
Exactly, you can't do that. I think the more modern day example of bringing a dead character back for no reason and no logical explanation would be Palpatine in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah,
literally, the line is somehow Palpatine returned.
Let's be fair. I mean, even if there was an explanation presented in the movie that was like definitive fact, Poe would not know what it was.
Of course, I give you that one, but the point is the audience doesn't get to know either, which is why we hate it.
Yeah, because you have to infer by seeing like the cloning machines type stuff.
Yeah,
or knowing about the extended universe story before Disney like completely jettisoned it, where Palpatine did this exact same fucking thing.
Yeah, I mean, Operation Eternity? No,
whatever.
Cinder. Is that Operation Cinder, where Palpatine's emergency plan in case he loses, and it doesn't matter. Point is, you have to establish rules and you have to adhere to them. And when your universe is super complicated with a bunch of abnormals, in order for the audience to connect with it and for it to feel grounded, some of the things that we accept in our real life have to be maintained. And one of them, the easiest one possible, is that there is no coming back from death. So in a universe of like the MCU where we have to accept robots and aliens and gods and all this other stuff all at the exact same time, understanding that any one of these characters is mortal and can die does get us involved, because how else am I supposed to connect to the Hulk? You know, like when he's in the Hulk form and he's supposed to be like totally indestructible, how am I supposed to relate to him except to know that he has a bit of an emotional core, obviously, but even as the Hulk, as Thanos makes clear in Infinity War, he can lose and he could die until Endgame says, no, if he died, we would just use a magical stone and he'd be fine. Then what the hell am I watching for? You know, like, why do I care?
I mean, with Endgame, at least, like, the only, like, well, unless if you count Gamora being brought from the past and whatever.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the only actual deaths that were actually undone were deaths caused by the Infinity Stones in the first place. Like, they very explicitly said that Hulk tried to bring Black Widow back and it didn't work because she didn't die from... Well, A, she didn't die in that timeline, and B, she didn't die from the whole stab thing. But
right, exactly.
Even that's only, like, the very vaguest of tenuous connections that doesn't necessarily work, because it's just like, well, they figured out a way to bring this character back that way, or brought these characters back. They could just invent another bullshit reason to do it now.
Yeah, exactly. Because the real reason is because then you start watching it from a production standpoint. You're like, oh, Scarlett Johansson doesn't want to come back. That's why her character can't. Oh, Robert Downey Jr. has a contractual thing left over from when he did the first Iron Man movie. He's too expensive. That's why he can't come back. And it's like, oh, but Gamora, played by Zoe Saldana, doesn't have that problem. She can come back. Oh, magically it worked for her. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And it breaks the audience's suspension
I didn't
of disbelief.
see Guardians 3, but at least with her, they were potentially setting up something interesting with it, because she came back from, like, before the first Guardians movie.
Yes, so it's basically a new character at that point. Look, we would just be complaining about Endgame the whole time. And the thing is, it kills me, is I actually love that movie, but I really have to shut my brain off to enjoy it. Because I can rip it apart for hours if I really wanted to, even though I love it, because it is so flawed from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, and when Endgame came out, it was also functioning as the end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe up to that point. If they break their rules there, we knew that Spider-Man if it was the end of it, then it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. Yeah, we would have been like, well, that was a weird way to end it, I guess, but I'm satisfied, I suppose. But yeah, but we also knew the new Spider-Man movie was coming out at that point. It was actually, the trailer was in the movie.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
Like, they ruined it a little bit, but whatever. Which is funny too, because in Phase 4, the Sony-owned one, the Spider-Man No Way Home, whatever the third one was the best one. The one with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield showing up. And so here's the thing. That movie was one of the few exceptions where having dimensional travel actually, in my opinion, worked. Now, I actually thought for the longest time I was actually a big proponent of the whole dimensional travel thing, because I think there's a lot of creative possibilities there, just like I think it would work with Deadpool. The problem is they went way too vanilla with it. It became so easy and effortless for the characters to do this, where like almost every element of Phase 4 was some story about a character doing that, and not even in always the same way. It's again, I'm going to go back to the well here and say Back to the Future. So Doc Brown is the only one who has ever invented a time machine. He's the only one who's ever been able to do this. So everything has to run through him and run through it. But it would be like if Back to the Future was part of another cinematic universe where, like, well, Doc Brown has one, but we also have the time machine from H.G. Wells, and also Star Trek characters can do it because they can get too near to the sun. Oh, and this guy, we can do a kid in King Arthur's court, so, like, he found a magical well in a cave that makes you go through time. You're like, and all of this is supposed to coexist? It's too confusing and too stupid, and it's got totally different rules for each version of the same concept. Do you understand what I'm saying?
And like Star Trek's not consistent with its time travel.
Yes, exactly. And that bothers me to no end. So if you want to do something that is potentially universe breaking, something as extreme in a narrative as time travel or dimension hopping, you have to have extremely clear rules about how that works. And it has to be very contained. I would have accepted dimensional travel if only one guy had ever figured, kind of like, so in the MCU itself, right, you have Hank Pym, and he's created the Pym particles. He's the only guy who's ever figured out how to, like, shrink and compress matter, and I know that was the point of the first movie, was that another guy had kind of figured it out eventually, and that's what creates the conflict. A story like that can work, because it's literally about the technology, but right. MCU doesn't do that. It's literally like, I have a magical stick that can make me go through it. Oh, I found a magical well. I built a machine. It's always to the same ends, and they don't even seem to conflict with each other. They just don't really care about each other's issue. The Tesseract apparently can also do it. It's just like, who can't do this at this point? Can Tony Stark just build a dimension gun now? I'm sure
he built time travel, so
there you go. Like, his version of time travel actually was a dimension hop time travel, per the very specific statement of that movie, because they even call Back to the Future bullshit, if you remember. So they're like, it doesn't work like that. It's your past is now your future, and your future.
Except for the part where it seems to have done so at the end.
Yeah, exactly. That part made no sense, and I was saying that back at the time, like, how did Captain America get old and just wait there? Because he's not supposed to be the same Captain America. That's not how that works. He's never supposed to catch up to that moment. That's by the design of the own rules you made. That's, again, I could complain about Endgame breaking its own rules constantly.
But it wouldn't have mattered if there was nothing else after it.
Yeah, we would have gotten over it. We'd have been like, that was kind of a lame way to end it, but whatever, I'm satisfied, I suppose. But that said, I do feel that Phase 4, it would be nice if it almost entirely had been wiped out, and I thought that was maybe what Deadpool was going to do, but I also feel like Disney wasn't going to be willing to just be like, oh yeah, admit that everything we made in Phase 4 was a mistake.
No, it'd be like if they made a new Star Wars movie that said that, oh yeah, the sequel trilogy never happened.
Yeah, there's been a lot of rumors about that forever, and unfortunately, as much as I would love that to be true, that they're not going to do that.
No. Honestly, with
just
Star Wars,
if
they do make another one, they should just be like a completely different... Basically be like a completely different universe, like completely disconnected from the previous story. Just like, it's Star Wars, there could still have like Jedi or something, but it's a different timeline, don't worry about it too much. The other ones don't matter for this. Because they clearly had no plan with the sequel trilogy, so...
No, they really didn't.
If they keep setting stuff every, 20 years or so, no one's going to be able to be invested, because, the galaxy's just going to constantly be exploding.
I think that we're not really meant to be talking about Star Wars here, but I agree with you. Like, the problem with Star Wars is that I don't think Disney really understood what they were getting when they bought it. They just saw it as an IP. But they didn't really understand that this isn't the MCU. You couldn't just, plop new characters into a fixed timeline of events. That's why, as much as, I liked Rogue One, you knew how it had to end before you saw it. It was like every character except Darth Vader has to die. You already know this. And boom, that's what happens. Because none of these characters can exist. Work. Yeah. Unless you were creatively weaving stories with these characters that could have intermixed with the original films off screen. I always thought what would have been a cool idea is, let's say all the rebel spies who got the Death Star plans. Imagine Rogue One. You've never seen it. It's a totally new movie in your mind. Okay. Rogue One. It's the rebel spies, the expository piece of dialogue we saw in A New Hope. We see their whole adventure, and it's this squad called the Rogue One. Okay. They're like this really elite troop of, soldiers, whatever. And they, go in and they get the plans or whatever. And, they eventually get away. They give them off to the rebels, but then they have a disagreement on how to use them. So they're not present for the Battle of Yavin. They're doing some other mission, and then they're interweaved where they do another mission. That's how they get the second Imperial plans. They're just this elite squad that does this type of thing. And then they eventually, it's not that long after, you find out that maybe the Knights of Ren that was never used in the Disney trilogy, they were just mentioned twice. It turns out that was the squadron, that they had just kind of changed their allegiance over the course of time. So it's you saw them do relevant events off screen, but in their own movie, you see where they fit into the timeline without actually messing with it. That's an idea, but that's nothing they did, and it's because you don't want to commit to that kind of project. It doesn't really matter.
Right, but it's the same deal, though. We don't want to get talking about Star Wars again right now. Maybe we'll save it for a different one.
Otherwise, we would still be talking about Power Rangers, guys. Everybody just listening, we would still be doing that. Just FYI.
We probably would have stopped by now, but we'd probably still be
Dude, there's more about Power Rangers I openly want to talk about. I'm just choosing not to. But anyway, go on.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case. But yeah, I'll have to... maybe I'll eventually watch a Marvel movie again, but I doubt I'm going to bother, watching everything. Although, technically, I never watched the Ant-Man movies, so...
They're actually not bad.
I know, it's just for whatever reason I just wasn't interested in going to see either the first Ant-Man movie when it came out in theaters, and then when I was watching the other stuff, it was like catching up on things. Just whenever it's I don't need to watch Ant-Man, and then I don't feel like I really missed much, honestly.
Ant-Man's fun. The first one's fun, but it does feel much like a Phase 1 movie, but it was Phase 3 by that point, I think. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Or was, it was Phase 2, sorry, but yeah. Just to kind of round this out, I guess it's cool to an extent that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back. obviously if he's Doctor Doom, which is predictable to me, he's just going to be evil Tony Stark, which, I mean, I made a joke about that, and apparently I'm already right, according to you.
I mean, I heard that there was, like, some, like, limited, like, Elseworlds type storyline about that, where Tony Stark was literally Doctor Doom there.
Yeah, and that, to me, that makes perfect sense, because if you're saying, okay, we have this, we don't care about timelines anymore. What we're basically saying is there's different universes where everybody went slightly different ways for different reasons. Everything branches out. It makes complete sense. There would be a timeline where Tony Stark, you know, rather than after his Afghanistan experiences became like this guy who's like, I'm going to be a hero. He came out of that just so angry and bitter. He's like, the world... He even kind of does this in the regular timeline where he's like, the world needs a shield of armor, so he gets kind of obsessive about it, and that's why he does, like, you know, Ultron and everything. In that version, he just went at it more hardcore, and he's like, he came to that conclusion faster, and that's how he became Doctor Doom, because he's like, the world needs an overseer to protect it, because it's run by children, and it needs a father, you know? That's where he comes up with Doctor Doom. Like, it's not that hard to write that timeline, and so... on that face of it, that's kind of cool. Will that make me go back and just be like, oh man, Robert Downey Jr.'s back, now I gotta see it? No. Like, I have effectively checked out of the MCU for all the reasons I said. Like, I want so desperately to love it the way I used to, but they really took it too far to the point where I really can't. It's the same with Star Wars. Like, when I do a Star Wars marathon, after Return of the Jedi, I watch The Mandalorian, and then I just turn it off. I do not need to watch the Disney trilogy, because it does such an effective job of just destroying everything I ever loved about it. And that's unfortunately mostly what MCU Phase 4 does, is it effectively destroys everything that ever had any consequence or meaning to me in all the previous movies or films or you know, shows. It's like, and that's how I feel about it, especially these rules of like dimension hopping and death doesn't mean anything. It's like, then why am I watching this? Because when you had any of these characters go through these struggles and you're sitting there watching them and you're seeing their pain and their suffering and their rise to the situation, you could be like, well, in a couple of movies I'm going to find out that none of this mattered because they could have just like got a pretty glowing stone and they could have just solved all their problems that way, because now it's nothing. Okay, yeah. That's not interesting anymore.
Yeah, like I'm gonna pivot a bit. Like, I'll give new Star Trek credit as far as like for most time travel stuff that they've done. It hasn't like been a time travel thing where it would be like easily, oh, we could bring back dead character X if we want to. Like in Discovery, like season 2 was a time travel plot, but the time travel, at least until the end, when time travel, like our main characters actually. I'm gonna be spoiling the end of season 2 of Discovery, but in that one, like the main cast of the ship time travels into the future on a one-way trip, because of reasons that happened in the thing. But like they were like dealing and trying to figure out stuff that's the result of time travel, and yeah, they did eventually end up in the future one time and saw everything destroyed because, of course, prevent the end of the universe and everything, because every single season of Discovery needs to have the end of the universe type plot deal, which is a problem with that show. But even like Picard season 2, which was like very, very, very bad. Like when they did the time travel, sends them back to now. It doesn't send them like 30 years back so Picard can go save Jack Crusher or something like that, or however many years it would have ended in. But at the one time where it like sends them back into the previous era in Star Trek was in Strange New Worlds when two main characters from Lower Decks ended up in the time of Strange New Worlds and were like in live action. But that was meant to be a humorous joke episode. Really, it wasn't like meant to really be like a serious thing. But there wasn't like anything like where you would. Also, time travel's been part of Star Trek for so long that at this point I'm just like, whatever. Yeah, it's a time travel episode. Okay, whatever. It'll happen, and then it won't matter again.
Big deal.
I mean, that's different philosophies, obviously, but
yeah.
As much as I would love to continue to just keep talking pop culture, because I guarantee we could do it all day, we probably should wrap it up. So any other thoughts on the MCU? You going to see any of this stuff? Does Robert Downey Jr. specifically coming back do anything for you?
Not really. I might watch some of it at some point. I still have a Disney Plus subscription, but I'm not at the point where I'm going to be like, okay, I have to watch everything to be up to date now. I'm just like, okay, I'll try watch it. How much of this, do I have to actually know anything for this one? Probably not. Okay. Like, I might see the Fantastic Four movie just because, hey, I haven't actually seen any of the other ones. Maybe I'll go and actually see this one. But, like, I'm not necessarily sure any if it's going to actually get me into the theater for it. Like, I'm definitely not, like, obsessively wanting to watch it now. I think most of the time that I was actually watching it for so long was because, like, my friends and I were going out to see all the new movies as they came out in the theaters, so it was more I was hanging out with them. Necessarily,
the social element.
Absolutely, like I have to see this movie. I have to see this movie. Type deal.
Yeah, I get it.
To begin with, so that probably didn't hurt.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I mean, I've been sitting here thinking about, like, is there anything they could do where I would go back to being an avid fan? And the answer is probably not. I think it's too broken. So at this point, if they did a completely fresh reboot of everything, you might have my attention.
I think do that eventually.
Yeah, but that could take years, and probably will. In fact, yeah, Marvel has more time to do that than DC does. Certain iterations of, I think, Superman, I think he goes into the first iteration of him goes into the public domain in like 10 years. Believe it or not, kind of like how Mickey Mouse went into the public domain, the Steamboat Willie.
Right.
Because I think he goes into the public domain in 2034. So yeah, he's got about 10 years left before like anybody can make a Superman movie. At least the first iteration. They can only make
a Superman movie as he was in the original comic.
Precisely, but you can't. But you could.
You could, but you can't use like any of his iconic villains.
I know. I'm not saying it like Disney can go out and be like, we're going to use like Henry Cavill or whatever. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I am saying that like Marvel has more time to kind of do whatever they want. Warner Brothers, who clearly doesn't really have much of a plan here, although they are working on a new Superman movie, they are going to start running up against competition of themselves. Eventually, Batman, I think, is only a few years after that, too. Like the first iteration of Batman.
Yeah.
Public domain.
Yeah, but that's the first thing that Marvel has to worry about is Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and that's not till I think that's like in 2060 or something where they have to care about that. I think they got a while. So.
Oh wow! I didn't realize that there was that much of a gap between.
I think Fantastic Four came out in like 1960, didn't it?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So probably. it would be like because it.
Right.
I mean, the X-Men were literally an allegory for like the civil rights movement, which was in the early 60s. So, maybe the 1950s, but even then, like you just basically take a century and then subtract 5 because it's 95 years is the rule. So, yeah, they still got quite some time before they have to care. But whatever. Anyway, we're going to wrap this up here. So, Joseph, thank you very much for joining me, as always. For that particular subject, Spencer, thank you. Abdullah, thank you, even though you weren't here. As well as Sinjeet, Lodmod, and obviously shout-outs to Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Thank you all so much for watching. And for everybody out there listening, I appreciate you. Again, Patreon back podcast. Please consider doing that at any time. Get the channel support, get shout-outs, get subjects. Potentially even be on the podcast if you want, or just get early access to everything. I appreciate the support. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.